We are back on the Rational Boomer podcast. It is Tuesday, but it's the start of the week. Labor Day was yesterday, and it was a holiday, and hopefully everybody had some good times, got a chance to relax for the long holiday weekend. But we're starting things off for another work week, and there's going to be a lot of interesting things coming. So I thought it was opportune that we had the opportunity to bring Eric from Iowa on board on the show today. We haven't talked in a little while, and there's certainly plenty to talk about. So welcome, Eric.
Well, thanks for having me. I always enjoy being on the show, and I thought today'd be a great day to get on the show.
What have you been impressed or concerned about in the last couple of weeks?
Very impressed with Vice President Kamala Harris, with how she's carried herself, how she just ignored some of the media, especially when they were trying to bring up questions about her race. She's just like, next question, move on,
Yeah.
no big deal. Um, but I was also kind of surprised a little bit by the Arlington story with Donald Trump and how it's still carrying, just because of how normally stories with him get buried and people forget about all of the egregious stuff he does day in and day out, and a lot of his stuff gets lost by the people that just aren't following.
Yeah, it's weird because, there are plenty of things that he's done or said that people are in an uproar about, and then he does something else and you forget completely about it until it's brought back up. But you're right, this one is sticking pretty hard. I think part of it has to do with the fact that Donald Trump and the Republicans see it as a pretty damaging thing for them in this upcoming election, and they keep talking about it. They keep trying to explain it away or try to distract, divert, or just spin it. If they would shut up about it and just do something else, they'd probably be okay. But they're right now in a panic mode. So they think they got to fix everything. And frankly, they aren't going to be able to fix anything.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. They're trying to talk their way out of this hole with it. And with as bad as Donald Trump is, something else would come along and probably push it away. But they're trying to sit there and spin it or cover it up or whatever to make it sound like it's not nearly as bad. Donald Trump comes out and he tried to at one point blame the families
Yeah.
for even inviting him, that oh, well, they only invited me to make me look bad. Really? No, you probably reached out to them, found that they were mad at Joe Biden, set the whole thing up, and now, like everything else, you threw them under the bus. But I'm even seeing people on TikTok, the far right creators, all trying to spin it and blame it away anywhere. Well, where was Joe Biden? Well, it wasn't an official Arlington event. This was a private family event. Well, the families asked for him to be there. Again, yes, the families did ask, but where the criminality or the scandal comes in is if he just would have shown up, had a solemn event, took a couple of private photos the family could hang on their wall, no problems. The fact that he turned it into a campaign ad
Right.
and made it ridiculous, that's where the issue is. And they, every which way they try to spin it and explain it away, they run into something else that's making it just worse.
Well, and the thing about it is, if we know Donald Trump, he's very transactional. Only way he goes to that is if he gets something out of it. That's just the way he is. And the only way he gets something out of it is video for his political ads. And JD Vance was complaining about how people were making too big a deal out of it. And he said, it's not like he produced a commercial while he was there, but within hours after that video was taken, there was a fucking commercial. So these people can't even be on the same page.
Well, yeah, and I guarantee you, JD Vance probably didn't even know this Arlington event was happening
No,
at all. I think JD Vance and Donald Trump barely talk at all about anything.
I
They're
agree.
not in the same book. JD Vance is just left out to dry, basically. And I think Donald Trump, if he had the option, he'd drop him for somebody else. But it's getting to be too late to do that.
Yeah.
He's going to have to ride this thing with JD Vance to the election, hope they get elected. And then prior to inauguration, they have JD Vance come down with some reason as to why he can't stay as vice president and pick somebody else.
Yeah, but it's not going to make any difference. It's not going to be helpful. It's going to be harmful, if anything. I mean, you never see Donald Trump and JD Vance together, whether it be campaigning or in the same room or anything like that. And that's very telling. I'm sure Donald Trump is tired of JD Vance because he feels like JD's dragging him down. But I find that hard to believe when you got a guy who has 34 felony charges, found liable of sexually abusing a woman and all the fucking stupid things he's done. I don't think JD is going to be the reason why he loses. But last night we had a very nice thing where Biden and Kamala Harris got together. It was Labor Day, and they gave a Labor Day speech to labor in Pittsburgh. And it was well attended and they were well received and it went really well. The weird thing is that as much as they're loud and obnoxious, Donald Trump and JD Vance did nothing for Labor Day. I have a feeling why they did that, but I'm curious as to what you think.
Well, I think in part, they don't have a message. They're trying to be pro union, pro labor, but it's not working. None of the stuff they're saying is working. They're not getting any unions endorsing them. They're having trouble getting venues. They're having trouble making these trips. And I'm guessing Donald Trump is trying to repair his image, either that or he just wanted to take the holiday for himself and go golfing.
Yeah, I think there's two reasons. Every time he's done something recently, it's gone south for him, and they're probably afraid he's going to make a fool out of himself. But more importantly, knowing how Donald Trump thinks and knowing that all these unions supported Kamala Harris, in his mind, he's probably thinking, I'm going to punish those motherfuckers. I'm not going to talk for the labor people as long as they're supporting Kamala Harris. So he just figured, fuck it. You don't support me. I'm not doing anything for you, which is contrary to what a president should be thinking, but that's Donald Trump.
You're right. That is how Donald Trump acts. And you know, with a big chunk of Project 2025, Agenda 47, or whatever they want to call it now, they want to take away a lot of protections from workers.
Right.
Their message is not pro labor. Like, was it JD Vance or Trump in Project 2025? One of the two supports this idea of getting rid of the 40-hour work week and going to a 160-hour work month before
Right.
you hit overtime. So employers can work you for 160 hours the first part of the month before ever paying you overtime. And then the end of the month comes around, schedule you nothing. And then now you got to meet the end of the month and your bills, and you have no money coming in.
Well, and the thing about it is, where do you think he got that idea? This isn't something Donald Trump pulled out of his ass. This is something that big corporations were in his ear about and said, oh, this would really help us. So why don't you go for that? Because nobody in their right mind would choose to do that. Even companies are a little short-sighted by doing that. It would never happen, first of all. No union would allow it, and nobody would pass a bill for it. He's just spewing shit that he thinks is going to get him votes. And this is the problem with Donald Trump. He flip flops all the time. I mean, you see what he's doing with abortion and Project 2025. He's trying to step back from it. And the problem with that is as he's trying to step back from it, now the people on the far right are going, hey, wait a minute. You can't do that. So instead of getting the moderates coming to his side because they know who he is, he's starting to piss off his own base. He's in a position right now where whatever he does, he fucks himself.
Oh yeah, I mean, I just really think it's going to be a landslide going into the election. I think we're going to see states and seats flip blue. That with Joe Biden in the race, probably still could have flipped, but would have been harder. Maybe wouldn't have flipped. I don't know. But you're going to see people step away from Donald Trump, and you're going to see this election really shake up the Republican Party with where they lose seats and where they lose support. I mean, what was it you and Will talking about how the challenger for Marjorie Taylor Greene's seat actually has a chance?
Yeah, that's crazy.
You know, you're seeing Republicans even coming out trying to support the Democratic candidates to get some of the crazy fucks out of their party and replaced with, even if it's for one cycle, let's get the crazy guy out or gal out Like, let's replace Marjorie Taylor Greene. We'll throw a Democrat in there for 2 years, and then we can run a normal Republican and go back to supporting Republicans. This is going to be a landslide like we have never seen in this country.
I tend to think so. I couch it by saying it's going to be a decisive win, but I could see how it could be a landslide because once the momentum starts, it just kind of builds its own power. I think people will say, this isn't a popularity contest. Bullshit. Presidential elections are always a popularity contest. Who's ever most popular tends to win. And right now, Kamala Harris is incredibly popular, and Donald Trump is losing support. When that happens, what else can happen but a landslide?
Oh, exactly. And, on top of it being a popularity contest, with how the voting goes, come election night, we're starting to get results rolling in from the East Coast while the West Coast is still voting,
Right.
and the states in the middle. So if it's looking iffy in the middle, some people may jump if they haven't voted yet. They may jump ship and try to catch on board with the winning side because they think it's going to be a landslide on the Democratic side, and they just want to be part of that momentum,
Right.
and they flip flop back the other way the next time.
Well, it is about momentum. Like you say, when people sense a big win for something, they don't want to be on the side that gets their ass walloped. Um, and when I've talked to Arlene and some other people, they talk about the data and they talk about the history, and I get that, and it makes some sense. But I think what we're dealing with right now, in this country is more than just data and how people typically vote. We're in like a cultural change. I think when we get past this election, we're going to notice this country entirely different. I mean, we noticed it when Donald Trump came in. This world's entirely different from what it was in 2014. Uh, and people have had enough of it. And I think people want to come back out to the sunshine. And I think we're going to see that. And with that kind of emotion tied to it, that's not something that shows up in polls. That's not something that you can guess at based on history. This is something like we've never seen before. So we should expect the unexpected.
Oh, most definitely. And I'm not crazy enough to think that this is going to um, affect massive change. Like it's going to be good for the country, and it's going to be good as far as change goes. Yes, because Vice President Kamala Harris is going to get a lot of stuff done that's going to help the nation. But we're not going. I'm not expecting massive changes in the way people vote after this election. I fully expect a big chunk of Republicans, once Donald Trump is out of the picture, to go back voting Republican, even if Kamala Harris is on the ballot, even if Democrats are getting things done, even if the economy looks good. I fully expect them to go shift back, at least some of them, because they're only here because they hate Donald Trump and the MAGA movement that
Yeah.
much.
Well, yeah, I think that's true, but there's another thing to consider. That says a lot about Republicans who are going to vote against Donald Trump, vote against their party. That's a that's a hard ask for Republicans typically, but it gives you the understanding that these people realize the desperate situation we are in. No, I don't like Democrats, but that crazy fucker is going to ruin this country. They understand that, and that's why they're moving to Democrats in this particular election. However, I would agree with you. The people, when they feel more comfortable with a candidate, there's a lot of things that have to come into play. First of all, the Republicans have to rehabilitate themselves at some point where they actually have candidates that are worth a shit. That may not happen in 2 years or 4 years. Secondly, we may not have the Republican Party as we know it right now. It may not happen. And the last thing, we're in for a complete change in the electorate. 2024, we know millennials and Gen Zs are going to play a big role in 2024's election. None of those, well, 75% are Democrats and 25% maybe Republicans. So that's going to cause a huge switch. And then when we get to 2028, the majority of the voters are millennials and Gen Z. So as much as the Republicans may want to come back, they may not have that opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, the best thing they could do, we've talked about it before, is to rebrand as a new conservative party, switch the ideology, figure out which issues they are willing to give up on, as far as being conservative, maybe only going back to being fiscally conservative and smaller government and things like that, and getting out of the Christian nationalism and all of that. And maybe there's a place where they can come back in with a new brand. But I think ultimately what would happen is at some point, whether it's 2028 or maybe 2032, the Democrats aren't going to be able to be a majority power party for too long without a major party contender against them,
Right.
without the party itself fracturing. And you're going to have the far, far left and the moderate Democrats splitting apart. So maybe that's what the Republicans have to wait for and merge with the moderate Democrats and form something new that way. Because right now, the Democrats basically are everybody who is not very hard conservative.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, if the Republicans are going to reimagine themselves based on the young people coming in, all they can really do is go centrist or right of center just a little bit. They aren't going to be buying into this radical right, religious right bullshit. The young people just aren't buying into it. It's clear by what we see and what we hear from young people. They got to change completely. But if the Republican Party has to change, they also have to get the trust of these people. And frankly, at this point, there is no trust in the Republican Party. Not a lot in Democrats either, but more so than the Republicans.
Oh yeah, you're right, and that's why I said I think they may have to come back around with a new party identity with whatever that might be. And as much as they may not want to do it, the Republican and the grand old party may have to go away. They may have to get away from that brand entirely, shift to a different identity, and maybe even go as far as, you know, their color is red. They
Right.
may have to pick up something else. They may have to switch to, you know, I don't want to say green or
That won't be
purple or
green.
whatever,
Yeah.
because I didn't want to go green because of the Green Party, but you know what I mean. They're they can't be opposite of the Democrats just by, oh well, it's red and blue. They may have to even shift away from the Republican red color. It's they're in for a lot of change, and the Democrats need to take advantage of this moment of weakness from the Republicans and get a lot of stuff done, because if they don't, they won't be around in the majority for long. Something else will come up to take their place.
Well, in this day and age, branding is crucial. That may be the most important thing when you're trying to sell something. And right now, the Republicans' branding is Donald Trump. They've got to, and that's why I say, this election, I think it'll be decisive. Hopefully, it'll be a landslide. But I think it's important that it is a decisive decision. And we need to see some accountability from the Republicans that have committed crimes. All these things are important because we as a people are kind of like a domestically abused family, and we need to see some closure. We need to see some accountability if we really want to truly heal these people. We'll be in a better shape if Kamala Harris is the president, but there still is impact and effects on people who have had trauma for 8 years.
Oh, without a doubt. And like I said, the Democrats have to be doing things to affect that. Bringing the economy back around. Well, the economy's good, but we need to fix it for the middle class and the lower classes. We need to build it, as Joe Biden would say, from the bottom up and the middle out, and start clawing back the wealth from the top 1% and 2%.
Right.
And we need to make it so everybody can afford housing and do all this. And that's part of how this healing process is going to take place. And beyond that, they need to do things like fixing the Supreme Court and closing up some of these other loopholes that were always covered by just the norm of how we do business,
Right.
and actually solving that issue and closing it up however they need to show the American people that this would never happen again.
Well, if Kamala Harris wins, the Democrats get control of the House and the Senate. And I think that's a real possibility. If they do that, I hope the Democrats recognize the opportunity. They talk a good game about wanting to do stuff for the middle class. Don't get lazy. Start doing things for the middle class. And if you hustle and do things for the middle class, 2028 will be a fucking cakewalk. And then 2028 to 2032, if you keep doing something for the people and keep the middle class happy, you'll control the White House and Congress for a long time. And it's going to be hard for the Republicans to come back in based on their track record and their history. But again, it's a matter of the Democrats realizing the opportunity and having enough motivation to actually push it.
Exactly. And beyond that, now Mitch McConnell touched on something that he thinks the Democrats are going to do if they get control of the Senate. He said the Democrats are going to nuke the filibuster and then admit Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. as states to add 4 new senators.
Well,
That would be Democratic in perpetuity.
like Will said, uh, don't threaten me with a good time. I have no
Yeah,
problem with any of those things. Those things are legitimate things it should do. Filibuster is an archaic fucking thing that's just a way to cause them to not do anything. Why wouldn't Puerto Rico be a state? And DC could be a state. There's no reason they shouldn't be, other than the Republicans feel like they'll get their ass kicked. Well, if you naturally are going to get your ass kicked, put on your big boy pants and get your ass kicked. That's just the way the country's going. You can't hold on to 20 years ago just because you want it. Things change, and demographics change and people change. This country's got to change, and you can't hold on for dear life to something that was effective or part of this country 30 years ago. It's time to fucking move on.
right. And if they were to do that with adding Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C., we should also look at the rest of our territories as well. You got the U.S. Virgin Islands, you got
Right.
Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands, and I'm forgetting one, but um, add them all in, make them all states, give them equal rights. But then what we also should probably do is look at how many members of Congress we have, and that number needs to go up
Yeah. Yeah.
some. If we're
Yeah.
adding in two, well, anywhere from 1 to 5 or 6 more states, we would need to add equivalent more seats in Congress,
Right.
because otherwise what would just happen is those seats get stolen from other states and other states lose representation by adding them in.
Right. Right. Well, and if the nature of this country is going more liberal and more democratic, you can fight it all you want. Uh, I the way I look at it, there are conservatives and there are Democrats, and people are now leaning more Democrat, but not because they're not conservative, but because of the shit show and the damage the Republican Party did. If they'd stuck to being just conservatives, literal conservatives, and doing what they did, we'd probably have a more even matchup here. But they went rogue and they started doing crazy shit, so they fucked it up for themselves.
Yeah, and part of that is because, well, I saw an opinion piece talking about this, talking about how when Donald Trump loses, there's going to be a civil war within the Republican Party
Well,
itself.
that could be, yeah.
And that's because the conservatives are fractured. They're not just fiscally conservative, small government, um, all about freedom. Now they're trying to push the religious side of it and looking at the past, looking at the 1950s, going, let's go back to that. Or in some cases, the 1850s, let's go back to that. And that's not playing with the American people. But there is a path, I think some people could get on board still for the small government, lower government spending, lower taxes, those kind of conservative ideas. People could still get behind. It's the crazy stuff they don't want.
Well, yeah, and low taxes are fine, but they should be low taxes for everybody, not just the wealthy. We know the taxes that were lowered for the middle class are now going to go up. So, in essence, we're paying for the tax breaks for the wealthy. Tax breaks, you can't just say tax breaks because tax breaks sound good, but it really depends on who gets them. And if we're not getting them, it's not going to be a popular decision.
Exactly. And what's kind of funny is these conservatives, they keep looking to the past. They look to the 40s, 50s, 60s and say, well, we should go back to how it was then. Back when the top 1% was paying 70 to 90% of
Right,
their wealth
right.
in taxes. But they don't want to do that, but they want
No.
to go back to the other ways of living. I think we should go back to them paying maybe not 70 to 90%, but a lot more. But then you also have Kamala Harris saying she wants to tax unrealized gains for some of these people. If you have, I think, what is it, more than $100 million in wealth or
Right.
something, she wants to look at your unrealized gains. Well, like I talked about one of the last times I was on the podcast, I think I said the minute you start talking about raising taxes or taxing something, it doesn't matter what caveat you put in front of it,
Right.
people freak out going, you're raising my taxes. I've seen so many videos by people saying, oh, well, if you own a single family house worth a couple 100,000 and it goes up in value by 5,000, you're paying all these taxes.
Right.
No, because you're not worth 100 million. But the damage is out there because they talked about raising taxes.
Well, they're trying to fix a problem where rich people don't pay income taxes, personal income taxes. And this comes into where the unrealized taxes is. They get a bunch of money into the companies, right? Companies may pay some taxes or whatever, but now they got to be paid. They don't take a paycheck from their companies. They take a loan for the companies from the companies for their income so they don't have to pay income taxes. That's why they're saying unrealized gains. Those unrealized gains aren't in fact unrealized because they take them out as loans and that's what they live on and they don't pay taxes because it's not income, it's a loan. It's a fucking loophole that needs to be closed. I don't know if what Kamala Harris is suggesting is the best way to do it, but something has to be done to do that because a guy pulling in 10 million, 20 million a year on loans from his own company and not paying taxes, that's bullshit. That has to be fixed.
Yeah, and beyond loans, it's stock options and
True.
all that stuff. A lot of the top earners at a lot of these companies, they get paid a base salary of $1,
Right.
and that's their income or
Right.
whatever. And then they have other bonuses that just enough taxable bonuses and stuff, so they at least cover the minimum wage laws. And then the rest of it's all in stuff where that government won't tax and won't touch. Well, what kind of bullshit is that?
Yeah.
Why can't I get paid in ways that's not going to get taxed?
Right.
That ain't happening.
Well, because you're not rich and you don't have
Yeah.
those options. That's why. And that therein lies the problem. And that's what they're trying to fix. I don't know if Kamala Harris's idea is the best way to do it. I'm not smart enough to know, but that does have to be fixed. There's a lot of people making a lot of money and paying zero taxes. They're paying less taxes or no taxes, certainly less taxes than we're paying, people getting average amounts of income. Um, I think the economic situation is really confusing to a lot of people, and I talk to a lot of people, and they just don't dig deep into the information, and they don't know a lot of stuff. I was going to mention something about the religion too. They want to incorporate religion into the Republican Party. Well, that's a bad move because, as I said, millennials and Gen Zs are playing a big role in 2024. They will be the majority in 2028. And let's be honest, millennials and Gen Zs aren't these hardcore church going people. They aren't the Christians that, and I'm not saying they're not Christian, but they're not the traditional Christians, and they're not going to be led around by their noses by priests and preachers and such. Religion has a problem too. They're grasping for straws because they're starting to fade too.
Yeah. And a big chunk of the problem with, well, I shouldn't say problem, but the millennials and the Gen Zs, they're looking at the religion that their parents had. And like, I will use my parents as a prime example. When they don't have an answer for something, their answer is God.
Right.
Millennials and Gen Zs, if they don't have an answer, they're pulling out Google. They're looking for what data in fact is out there. And if they can find something that explains it, they've got an explanation, and they're not satisfied with just, well, it's that way because of God.
Right.
And that's at least part of what the problem is. And beyond that, they're not accepting just, you know, point blank religion with this diehard idea that some of the other people are, because, well, it's the same church I've gone to my whole life. Once they start putting it together, that, oh, this guy is a little crazy and he's a little far out there on his ideas about being too conservative and forcing other people to be like me. They're saying,
Right.
nope, I'm out of here. That's not what I want to be part of.
I'm curious. You're a millennial, um,
Yep.
and I try, when I look at the problems in this country, because I'm kind of past my prime, nothing's really going to change in my life between now and the time I take the dirt nap. So I don't have some of the pressures that young people have. Having been a young person, I understand the problems. But one of the biggest things that have been concerning me when I look at my own kids and I look at younger kids is this housing issue. I mean, we've got some real problems with it in the sense that, we talked about student loans and nobody wants to pay those back. The unfortunate situation is if you're saddled with huge student loans, you can't afford or qualify to buy a home. And then when you want to go rent, I'm hearing all these horror stories about kids getting paid ridiculously low amounts of money, and they can't make enough money in a month to even get an apartment. So a lot of those people are living back with their families. This is a huge issue, not just because we got to help the young people. When they take over, if nobody can buy a house and nobody can afford rent and everybody's living with their family, our fucking economy is sucked.
Yeah, you're right. And that's why I appreciate what Vice President Kamala Harris wants to do. She's talking about first-time home buyer credit, $25,000 to help
Right.
people buy a home.
Right.
She's talking tax credits to builders who are building smaller starter homes for first-time home buyers to get into to get them into the market. But
Right.
the tax credit would only be available. You can't sell it to a major corporation or a landlord or whatever. It would have to be verifiable to a first-time home buyer. And those things sound great. Now, Joe Biden had wanted to do a first-time home buyer's tax credit as well. That never materialized. So we'll see what happens with that. But this $25,000, if it does materialize, that's great. That will help people buy down their loan so they can maybe get in, or maybe they can, you know, now qualify for a loan where they couldn't before because of their debt to income ratio or whatever, especially if they can just put it against the cost of that house.
Right. Well, I mean, if people need 20% down on a house and you're paying $300,000, that's 60,000 bucks you got to come up with cash. I mean, they can't pay rent. How are they going to come up with 60,000 bucks or 30,000 bucks for that matter to put down on a house?
It's hard now out in some of the more rural areas, like where I live. You got the uh, what is it, the FHA loans where you can get uh zero down on
Right.
your loan, but you're in a more rural area. A lot of younger people don't like living in the rural areas. And I say rural, my town's like 15,000 people. I mean, it's still not rural. I mean, it's not like, a few hundred people, but it's also not a big city. But a lot of people don't want to live here.
Well, let me ask you this.
They're getting out.
You work with a lot of younger people. Have you heard them talking much about this housing issue? It's got to be affecting them.
Some they're talking about, like, some of the recent high school graduates are talking about getting places together, getting
Right.
roommates just so they can even swing rent.
Right.
We got a couple low income places here in town, and we got people that I work with that live there, and they're like, it sucks. It is the bare minimum. If I could afford anything else, I would be out, but I
Yeah.
can't, so I'm stuck here. And I
Yeah.
hear that a lot about where they are. They're stuck living where they are because they don't have options.
If I'm a millennial, my biggest concerns would be Roe v. Wade, because I'm still in childbearing years, housing, and income. I mean, we haven't raised the minimum wage for years and years and years, but prices continue to go up. That whole wage issue has to be addressed because if these people aren't making enough money to participate and be a consumer, the economy goes to shit, and that's where the short-sightedness or the Republican Party is. You want to drag all the money out of the middle class, but then you don't have a market to sell your shit to. It just doesn't make any sense.
Right. And the minimum wage was always supposed to be this idea that you could support on a 40-hour work week a family of four and cover your basic needs.
Right.
And one of the last times I saw somebody break down the dollar value of that, it came up to like 25 or $27 an hour average nationally.
Right.
Now that's average.
And that's
And
not
you're
living
going to have
good.
places that
And that's not
no,
living good.
that's having enough for a car payment, pay your rent or mortgage, basic food, internet, and a cell phone,
Right.
and pay your other utilities. And that was based on national averages. And that was for a family of four. Well, but then you hear these people say, well, we can't raise the minimum wage because it's going to raise the cost of everything. Like you said, everything's gone up anyway. In 2009, the last time minimum wage went up, I was renting a two-bedroom apartment for it was either 425 or 450 a month.
Right.
They're renting that same apartment for almost 900 now.
Yeah. And 900 for an apartment is still cheap, but it's because you live in a more rural area.
Right. And beyond that, wages haven't gone up, but the costs have. But then
Yeah.
they say, well, you got to raise, well, minimum wage is only for a starting job. Again, no, it wasn't. It was for supporting a family on 40 hours a week. But they want to say, well, these places need to pay a starting job. If you want more money, go get a better job. Well, then when people go do that and they get the better job, there's no one to work at McDonald's during the day because you relegated it to high school kids who can only work after school hours,
Right.
and then they're mad they can't get their lunch
Right.
at McDonald's. So they're not seeing the big picture, and I don't know how you educate them to that.
Well, you always hear them screaming about the free market. Let the free market go. So you have to pay people more money and the prices go up. Okay. Well, do they really have to go up that much? Or are you just saying that because you don't want to do this? Here's the thing. If you're in a business and you can't pay the people enough a livable wage, then you maybe shouldn't be in business. Or maybe you adjust and just have to accept making less profit in order to stay alive. I mean, that's what happens. If you're charging too much for shit, people quit buying it. So then what happens? You drop the price. That's just how it goes. That's the free market, as the Republicans love to tell us.
Well, yeah, look at what did I see something about Walmart? They made record profits, blaming it all on inflation, inflation, inflation. And then stories are coming out about Kamala Harris wanting to tackle price gouging and this and that, and people are getting mad about them price gouging. And now suddenly they're saying, "Oh, we're going to lower the prices on over 7,000 items store wide, including groceries."
Well, because
Telling us,
they foresee Kamala winning, and they know they're going to have to deal with some shit once that happens.
yeah. And so it tells me they could have lowered those prices all along.
Yeah,
They chose not to. They wanted us to pay what we could pay and pay through the nose.
right. Yeah, they'll do whatever they can get away with for as long as they can get away with it. And once they get pressed, they go, "Oh, okay, sorry. We'll drop the prices now." But think of all that money that was essentially stolen or gouged by these big companies, and they just did it as long
Mhm.
as they can get away with it. The best thing we can do is get somebody in office who doesn't let them get away with it. That wouldn't be Republicans, that would be the Democrats at this point.
Exactly. And as I was telling one of my coworkers, he's one of these libertarian small government guys who doesn't know what he's talking about most of the time.
Right.
But he was trying to say, well, I'm for all small government. There shouldn't be any sort of minimum wage. Like you said, let the free market decide. Well, we're above that anyway and everything. So why should we even have it? I go, because if they could get away with it, they'd be paying us 25 cents an hour if they could get by with it.
Right, exactly.
They're
Well,
only paying us above minimum wage now because you put out a sign saying you're paying 7.25 an hour and nobody's showing up with an application.
right. I was talking to somebody in a drugstore recently, and they were bemoaning the fact that young people just don't want to work. And I said, "You sure it's they don't want to work, or they're not willing to work for bullshit money? Maybe they have more pride in themselves. They're not going to go out there and work for pennies and still be in poverty, but working their ass off. Better they try to find a better job so they can get out there and survive. Uh, there may be some younger people that don't have the work ethic that I had or you have. Um, but a lot of it has to do with motivation. I mean, if you tell a kid you come to work here and you work hard and you're going to make a living wage and you're going to be treated well, you might have a little more motivated workers. Like I say, I'm not saying there aren't some lazy kids, but it's real easy for us to say, oh, those kids, they said it about us, they said it about you. It's always been the same, but they keep getting paid less money. Let's look at the problem and
Yeah.
how we fix it.
Well, part of that is I was having this conversation with a former coworker before I left that job. And one of the things he pointed out is the carrot's gone.
Right.
It used to always be the carrot and the stick. You dangle the carrot in front of them, and they always think they've got a chance of making something of themselves, and they can advance to a certain position, or they could make enough money to retire. The idea that you work for one company your entire life and you'll retire well is almost gone unless you got a union job.
Right. Right.
You now anymore, if you want to go up in any company, you got to put yourself out there and switch jobs 3, 4, 5 times
Right.
before you find something that pays you what you want and gives you the position that you want, et cetera, and starts you on a track. And even then, you're only going to get so high, and then you got to move again.
Yeah. It's funny when I talk to some young people, they have the wrong attitude, but I don't know that I can blame them for having the attitude. I can't do anything. There's nothing, I'm never going to get out of this. And that's not the attitude to have when you go into life. But they are faced with a lot more limitations than I was when I was young. And I had some limitations. We all had a tough time getting jobs and getting in our position, and ultimately we do. But it seems like these younger kids really have far less opportunity and far less hope just by virtue of nobody's willing to pay them.
Yeah. And I know about 3 years ago, I left a job. I had been there almost 20 years. And I went and I left for $9 more an hour. I went to a different company because I went to them and said, hey, I've been here 19 years. I've got 15 years full time with you. Here's my resume. I think I deserve more money. Took
Right.
them 3 weeks to get back to me, and they said, we think you're getting paid fair. We'll talk to you again in a year. Put my application out, had an interview by the end of the week. And in that interview, I got offered a job on the spot with almost $9 more an hour
Yeah.
for a company I'd never worked for. And they
Right.
went, why aren't you getting paid like this? And I said, okay, 19 years. Yeah, my benefit package is kind of nice, but that doesn't equate to money in my pocket. I'm out. And I walked. And I had picked up a part-time job when I was working that other job, the one I walked away from. I'm still at that part-time job. I've been there 3 years. I'm making almost $4 an hour more at that part-time job than I was at the one I left
Wow.
after 19.
Wow.
And that's people are staring at that. They're going, if I can jump companies, why would I stay if I can get more money and significantly more money? And then you're constantly losing people. You got to train people. You got to bring them in, get them to know your system. And then about the time they're starting to really produce for you, I know I was the exception because it was 19 years, but you get them in after about 6 to 9 months, they're already looking for other opportunities because they're like, well, I'm seeing a sign down the road says they're starting $2 or $3 more than what you're paying me, and
Right.
they're considering leaving.
Yeah. And those are the people that will say, "Oh, nobody wants to work." No, nobody wants to work for
Yeah,
bullshit. Nobody should have to work for bullshit.
exactly.
I'm not going to break my back for half the money that somebody else is willing to pay. Just not going to fucking do it. And I appreciate what the kids are trying to do. I told my kids, I said, there was a time when businesses were loyal to their employees and they expected their employees to be loyal to them. I said, that doesn't happen anymore. There are no employers that are loyal to that I know of that are loyal to their employees. So when you get an opportunity, don't feel bad about taking it because If it was advantageous for them to cut you tomorrow, regardless of how long you're there, they'll fucking do it. So it's all for one, or
Well,
it's everybody's in it for themselves, and you got to play the game or you're going to get burned.
exactly. And listening to some of these younger people, I'm hearing them go, yeah, why would I come to work sick? We've got sick hours that are there to be taken. Why
Right.
shouldn't I take advantage of them? We've got, I'm not going to come in and bust my ass and go above and beyond every single night because
Right.
the employer is too lazy to hire two or three more people. Or the other one I'm seeing with some of them is they they like to play this game with part-timers, especially some of these companies. They'll say, well, we're going to flex your schedule a little bit, and maybe we won't schedule you on Thursdays, but if we call you, we'd appreciate it if you'd be available to come in.
Yeah.
Then they want to give you the hours after, but not schedule in advance so you can make a life and plan
Right.
to be there. It's
Right.
just, we'll call you, we'll do whatever, and they
We
expect
want
you to drop everything when they get the phone call.
Yeah, we want all the advantages. We want you to be the slave, and I want you to smile about it and be happy to be paid a shitty wage for it. Yeah, absolutely. Eric, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to talk about Donald Trump, my favorite topic. I want to talk about the upcoming debate, the sentencing, and all that stuff, and get a sense of what you're seeing from your perspective. But we will be right back after this. We are back on the Rational Boomer podcast. Eric from Iowa is with us tonight. He's been on frequently, and always a great show when Eric is with us. We were just talking about the TikToks that you do, and he's at Analytical Iowan on TikTok. Be sure to check him out. He's at Analytical Iowan on YouTube too. So if you can't go one, go to the other place. But you had one video that you did that became very popular, and I think it has to do with a lot of an interesting angle on what could happen between the time after the election and the time that Kamala Harris is inaugurated. And it poses a great opportunity for Joe Biden, whether old school politician Joe would be willing to do this or not, I don't know. But why don't you explain what you were telling me, because I think it's an interesting angle.
Well, I was looking at it, and it kind of started right after Joe Biden stepped aside. And I was looking at it going, it just dawned on me, like within that first couple of days, that if we do what we need to do when we give Vice President Kamala Harris, soon to be President Harris, a favorable Congress, a favorable Senate, and a favorable House, that new Congress comes in on January 3rd.
Right,
Well, Joe Biden's still president till noon on January 20th.
right.
That's
17 days.
17 days where he's still in charge. He can sign anything Congress passes him. Now, Congress is going to have some work to do to get down. They're going to have to get a speaker and do all the things they need to do and get their committees set up. So they are going to have some of their own work. But some of the stuff he could do ahead of time to build her administration kind of ahead is, we were talking about raising taxes and how it's this idea of raising taxes is unpopular no matter how you phrase it.
Right,
Well, if he's got her tax plan, he could get it passed.
right,
Congress would have to be on the ball, push it through, get it done in 17 days. But if it gets through and on his desk in 17 days, he signs it, and then all of the benefit of all the extra funding is available under her watch. And when people say, well, you raised taxes, no, Joe Biden did,
right.
you know,
She can get the benefit
things
and
like
not
that.
have to take any blame.
Exactly. Same with fixing the Supreme Court. We talk about expanding the court. Now, I know Joe Biden's against the idea of expansion, but if that's the quickest way to get the court back under control and back working for the American people, maybe what they do is they pass a bill, Congress gets something, again, have to be on the ball, push through, and they get it to his desk. Now, maybe he signs it right away. There's 4 new justices to fill. He doesn't have time to appoint anybody. Maybe he takes one just as a courtesy. He says, "Hey, I'm going to throw this nominee in the hat," and the Senate does with it as they will. they push it through and however long it takes them. But then Vice President Kamala Harris walks in with 3 or 4 new Supreme Court justices. Hey, the seats are just here. I'm just filling them. Joe
Yeah.
Biden expanded the court.
Right.
And if there's any negative blowback, at least some people would say, well, yeah, that was the Biden administration. He did that. She's just taking advantage of what's there.
When you put out this scenario, Eric, you're starting to sound a little Republican because that's exactly what the Republican Party would fucking do.
It kind of is, but at the same point, it's looking at it going, and I just kind of was, I had a thought just early on, and it was like, if with as much as Joe Biden wants to support Vice President Kamala Harris, like I said, soon to be President Harris, this could be a way he could really set her administration up and let her hit the ground running and still take some of the negative heat off of her, because in the moment he would get the negative heat.
Right.
But when you start looking at his legacy, it would just build on his legacy, and he would end up, a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road, as you're seeing the effects of it, he'd look like a genius.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he should be worried about nothing else but his legacy, and he's got a great legacy as it is. That would be the question in those 17 days when he has a free shot, essentially, and he can protect Kamala Harris at the same time. The question is, does somebody like Joe Biden actually do that? Because he's more centrist. Then he went more left. Um, will he do that? Will they be that calculating? Because that's uncommon for the Democrats. Can they be that calculating to try to sneak some stuff through perfectly legally, perfectly legitimately, but it's taking an opportunity that they wouldn't normally have?
I don't know, because beyond whether or not Joe Biden would be on board, I think you could sell him on the idea, especially the taxing the rich.
Yeah.
You could sell him on that. You could sell him maybe on even like abolishing the debt ceiling. Just
Yeah.
let's just pass a legislation. Let's get rid of that thing. I think he'd be okay with that because he could see the benefit. The sticking point, I think, out of all of the things I laid out, would be the Supreme Court. I think he still thinks there's a better way to deal with that. He may not be on board with it, but even if he doesn't sign it, if they push it through and it sits on his desk, it's still sitting there waiting for her to sign January 20th. She could sign it day one.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, you talked about the debt ceiling, and we know that we have another budget issue at the end of September, and the possibility that the country could shut down because they can't come to terms on the budget. I know how it's gone the last 3 times. I have a sense it's going to be the same thing coming up here. But what are your thoughts about are the MAGA folks this time going to be successful in shutting the country down? Because real Republicans don't want it to happen. They're going to take the heat, but MAGAs burn down everything.
Nope, I do not think they're going to shut the government down. I think it's going to happen just like it's happened before. They're going to pass continuing resolution, something like that, keep the funding levels where it is, kick it out probably past January 3rd. They may kick it out far enough that it's going to be the first thing the new Congress has to deal with
Right.
and deal with in short order. Maybe they do it to January 5th or January 10th or something like that. But I think they're going to kick it out. And Donald Trump wants them to shut the government down.
Right. He
He says
wanted them.
attach all sorts of immigration stuff to it.
Well, of course, Donald Trump wanted
Which,
it the last 3 times. He wanted it shut down, and he didn't get it.
right. I don't think it's going to happen. He wants the immigration thing. He wants the SAVE Act where, you have to prove citizenship to vote, which is already a thing. Like non-citizens aren't voting anyway. Like it just doesn't happen. But he wants to do this because he thinks those things would help him in the election. And I think the Republicans themselves, the centrist Republicans or the what we used to call moderate Republicans, are saying we can't touch that with a 10-foot pole. We got to jettison this. We got to just pass it, get done with it, deal with it, and hope it doesn't bite us in the election, so we may have a shot at keeping the House, and we can deal with it next term.
Well, one of the problems Republicans have with this too is that as much as shutting the country down would hurt individuals like you and me, could hurt us. it's going to have a serious impact on big corporations too. They're going to be fucked too. And I can't imagine these big corporations who are lining the pockets of Republicans are going to be for that. And I just have a hard time imagining Republican candidates who aren't MAGA going along with that bullshit. I just don't see it.
That and if this wasn't what less than 2 months to the election,
Yeah.
by the time the debt ceiling comes around, or not the debt ceiling, the budget comes and they have to pass, I think it's by the end of the month.
Right.
You're talking barely over a month to the election. They're not going to be willing to risk a government shutdown when they control one chamber of Congress.
Right.
If they had Congress in its entirety and they were fighting with Joe Biden, maybe, or something like that. But would they only control one of the three spots in Congress or in DC? They're not going to risk it because all of the political blowback is going to be on Republicans. And for as much, and they're already worried about it being a landslide,
Right.
they're not going to risk a big misstep like this.
No, I agree. Like I said, the last three times they'll come up with an answer last minute of last day, like they always fucking do, and it'll be a big non-story. One of the things I wanted to bring up is we are literally right now a week away from this debate, this proposed debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Now, at first, it sounded like he was going to back out. Then he sounds like, yeah, I'm going to do it. Then there were some issues over the rules. They want to shut the mics off when the other person is talking, which is weird because that's what Biden wanted when he first met with Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump's team wants it. Kamala says, leave it wide open. And I'm not convinced she cares whether it's open or not because I don't think it's going to make a difference. But she sees this as an opportunity to needle Donald Trump. Donald Trump says, I don't mind if it's open. So Kamala comes back and says, well, you don't mind if it's open? Then why are you being led around by the nose by your administration? Aren't you the boss? And she's just pushing him there. So
Uh-huh.
now, but yesterday, Donald Trump's going back to his feet shuffling again. Well, ABC's really bad. It's really a bad place. I don't know why I would do it there. Once again, he sounds like he's setting it up to give himself a reason to bail. So now we don't even know if he will really show up. We're a week away. He loses either way he goes. He either gets annihilated or he made to look like a pussy ass bitch. And I think looking bad is more important to him than getting annihilated because he's delusional enough to think that he can beat Kamala Harris. How is this going to shake out?
I think it's going to in part depend on what happens. Let's see, this is airing on Tuesday, which is the 3rd.
Right,
So tomorrow, effectively the 4th, at this town hall he has on Fox News.
right.
If
Okay.
his handlers have to do with him what they did at the National Association of Black Journalists and cut it short and pull him and do this because he's starting to ramble, and if he starts taking a lot of heat in the media and the press um, about it, I think he may find a way to back out. If he gets through the whole thing, his handlers don't bother him, and he doesn't take too much heat with the media about it, and people are making him sound like, oh well, he sounded pretty good there, and he's getting favorable reviews. I think he goes through with the debate with Kamala Harris.
Think about what you just said. If he does the town hall and he looks good, what do you really think the odds of that fucking happening? He's going to
Oh,
look bad. I mean, he's become the whipping boy of the media now. Joe used to be Joe Biden, but now it's Donald Trump. It's just going to get worse between now and November. They're going to rip him apart because he can't complete a sentence.
I I wasn't saying I think he's going to look good. I'm going through what he's thinking in his mind.
Okay, gotcha. Gotcha.
Like in his mind, he's like, if I get through this and I look good and I get some good press for it, you know, I think then he goes through with it. But if he gets, like you said, he's the whipping boy. If he gets the negative press, if his handlers have to stop it early or whatever, or even Fox News cuts away from it in the middle of this town hall, I think he steps back and he goes, well, I'll look bad for not showing up. I'll give them an excuse. They'll buy it because it's me, and I just won't go.
Yeah. Well, it's my
He's all about
contention,
whatever way makes him look better.
and nothing he's doing makes him look better. It all makes him look worse. My contention is if he does do the debate, he will most certainly get annihilated. I think everybody agrees with that. And no matter what the rules are, he'll get annihilated. I will say once that first debate is over, there will be no other debates. Donald Trump will not put himself in a situation to be embarrassed again. This will be the one and only debate with Kamala Harris.
You might be right. And I've been saying the same thing on TikTok. I think this may be the only one. However, with his sentencing coming up on the 18th, and you also have the hearing before Judge Chutkin on the 5th, if those things go poorly, but he's still a free man and things look bad and he needs a way to swing the narrative, I could see him trying to somehow jockey for another debate, hoping that Kamala Harris doesn't show or hedges or whatever and says, well, the last one was so poor, I don't need to do this again with you. And he can try to claim a victory that way just to get a victory back from the media and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Donald Trump is delusional. He thinks he can always pull it out, and he has yet to do it. It'll be interesting if the debate goes on because, as a prosecutor, Kamala Harris is just not going to get beat in this situation. And this guy can't help but going off on tangents. It'll be interesting watching the town hall. He's going to be handed softballs and he's going to, be handled with kid gloves. But I still don't think he's able to keep on track. He can't do it in his fucking rallies.
No, he's not. It's not going to be. I would be surprised if between his handlers and Fox News, if they don't try to find a way to um end it ahead of the 90-minute mark
Yeah.
or cut it or do something to try to make him look better, whether it's extended questions by the moderators, more monologuing, giving him a chance to pause in between questions so he's not rambling as long, or trying to redirect him or whatever they try to do. But he can't stay on topic.
No, he
He's going
can't.
to be talking about Hannibal Lecter, sharks, batteries, uh, no no bacon because of windmills or whatever he said in that one.
Yeah.
He's going to be just talking about whatever, and he looks like the rambling old man. And because there's no counter to him at this point.
No. No. And they want to. I hear people saying, "Stay on topic. Stay on topic." If by some chance he could even do that, it's not going to pull him out of the fire. He's already done too much damage, but he just physically can't do that. And I think Kamala Harris and the Democrats understand how to keep throwing him off. And that's by saying things that attack him, that embarrass him, and he can't help himself but respond. In fact, there was a situation where he was talking and he says, "Yeah, they always tell me to stay on topic, don't do this, don't attack, but they attacked me, so I should be able to attack them." That's his mentality. And no matter how many people tell him what he needs to do to win this, he physically cannot do it.
No, he doesn't have the ability. And it just shows how much people um, babied him along all the way through,
Yeah.
and how he was excused a lot of the way through for being the outsider at first, or, well, he's not really a politician or whatever. And now the chinks in the armor that were always there are actually being exposed by real or close to real reporting.
Right.
And they're actually showing him for what he is. And nothing he's going to say or do is going to salvage him at this point. And I don't think it's going to be close in this election.
No, well, the thing about it is Donald Trump, when he first came out in 2015, 2016, he was, he was a dancing monkey. He was good TV. So they were all on board to keep feeding the golden goose or keep giving bananas to the dancing monkey. But now the tide has turned, and now it's become popular to kick his ass because it's so easy to do.
Mm-hmm.
The media has taken a different attack on this whole situation and has a different look at Donald Trump, and it's so common. They love building people up, but they love even more tearing them down. And Donald Trump is in this stage where they're tearing him down, and it's not going to change between now and November. Donald Trump can't pull it out, and the media's having too much fun doing it.
Yeah, the only way it would actually revert is, and I don't see it happening, is if they come up with something ridiculously damning and scathing on Vice President Kamala Harris or Tim Walz. And I mean, and it would have to be huge
But
that that would turn them into the new punching bags. And I just don't see it happening.
not in this period of time, and not with a track record of of constant failures by the Republican Party. They just don't have it in them to pull it together. And the problem is they might have people that could pull something off, but Donald Trump refuses to let them do it. He doesn't take orders. He doesn't take suggestions. He does what he thinks best, and he's a fucking idiot. So there's no way it's going to work. It's just not possible.
Exactly. Like he does what he wants, and he thinks if he says it or he, you know, came up with it or whatever, it's the best idea possible. But when recorded, it was Labor Day, and I was driving out through rural Iowa today to go visit my parents, and I was telling you before we did the show, I'm not seeing the Trump signs plastered all over every farmhouse like I did the last 8 years. I'm seeing very few. I could think of like three in the entire trip I took that I saw, where before it was everywhere. I think the support is failing, and I think some of the hardcore Trump supporters were only on board, maybe not because they didn't realize how bad he was, but because they saw it as the popular thing to do because of how the media was portraying him
Right.
as being so strong. Now that he looks like you said, the dancing monkey, and he's looking so stupid, they're like, I don't want to be associated with that clown,
Right.
and they're backing away.
I don't like polling very much, but you did some polling with a very small sample, uh, and you can verify this polling and sample. But you were telling me about your parents.
Yeah, I both my parents very conservative, very religious. Mom voted, well, they both voted for Donald Trump in 2016 based on one issue, and that was abortion.
Right.
Same with 2020, voted for Donald Trump based on abortion. They are, it sounds like they didn't come out specifically and say they were voting for Kamala Harris, but they have said they're not voting for Donald Trump. And they even stayed up. Now, my parents go to bed super early. 7:30 at night is a late night for them.
Right.
They stayed up and they watched most, if not all 4 nights of the DNC.
Wow, that's interesting.
And they were impressed. And they couldn't believe the atmosphere around her and stuff. And you know, they have said some of the things we said though, is that she needs to get to work and actually do some of the stuff she's saying to help people.
Right.
But there sounds like at least this election, they're going to vote for Kamala Harris.
Well, here's my question. Again, we're talking about two people, but you know these two people very well. There are the stereotypical Republican conservative in a rural area in a red state. Okay. I'm not saying they're MAGA. It doesn't sound
No,
like they're MAGA, but still, a lot of people who weren't MAGA voted for Donald Trump in 2020 because they vote Republican. You said the issue they voted for Donald Trump was about abortion. What is the issues do you think that are causing them not to vote for Donald Trump now?
a lot of just they are finally being woken up to the full bad character of Donald Trump.
Right.
And it's just who he is. The him going to Arlington. Like neither of my parents had saw the photo of him standing behind the gravesite with the thumbs up and the cheesy
Right.
smile.
Right.
But they were mad about it when they saw it because I showed it to them. But they're hearing about the hush money case and the 34 convictions. They're finally hearing about the E. Jean Carroll case and all of that, the documents. They're hearing about this stuff and January 6th and all of it. And they're finally hearing about how bad he really is, and they're turning away from Fox News.
So they're basically voting against him because they feel like they'd be embarrassed by voting for him.
He's against every like they've realized he doesn't stand for the stuff he claims to stand for.
Right.
And they don't care about the fact that like now my mom would probably say she still cares about the abortion issue, but she sees all of his negative flaws as being more important. And I think part of it is, especially here in Iowa, we already have the abortion ban in place.
Yeah.
So she feels like that fight's over now.
Right. Right.
She feels like they won that fight. So I'm I'm guessing a little bit about that, but I think that's how she feels on it, is that they won the abortion fight. So now she's looking at the rest of the issues.
Let me ask you this, based on your folks being kind of stereotypical in the conservative Republican thing, do you think them realizing how bad Donald Trump is, do you think that's uh, more widespread with other Republicans of your mom and dad's ilk?
I think a little bit. Like I said, I didn't see hardly any Trump signs. I think some of them are finally starting to see how bad he is, and they're seeing past the bluster and the bravado and this image that he has built up, and they're getting past it. And at least for this election, they're willing to say, okay, he is horrible,
Yeah.
because they're finally seeing him for what he is, because the media quit covering him with kid gloves because they don't have Joe Biden to punch around anymore.
Well, and I think a lot can be said about Donald Trump. If he was your typical politician who could keep his mouth shut and still do the same things he wants to do, he might be able to fool some of the stereotypical Republicans. This is this is about how bad Donald Trump is, how bad of a candidate. I've said before, and I don't have any qualms about saying this because I dare anybody to prove me wrong. Donald Trump is easily the worst presidential candidate from a major party in the history of this country. I don't care what anybody says. You know, you can talk about Andrew Johnson and all that stuff, and there were some bad ones, but Donald Trump is by far the worst.
Yeah, I think you're probably right, because a lot of the other bad ones that we think of, we view them as bad through the lens of now. We don't look at them through the lens of their
Right,
time.
right,
How were they viewed in their own time? Yeah, Andrew Johnson, he was the first president to be impeached, or he was almost removed, missed it by one vote.
right,
But even that, they said, yeah, it's bad, but he's still not that bad.
right.
Like it wasn't. Even Nixon was able to come back around and kind of redeem himself and make himself an elder statesman before he died.
Yeah, I don't see Donald Trump ever redeeming himself. Once he's done here, he's going to be a pariah in this country.
Yeah, we've talked about it before. I've said the same thing, and that he's going to, and it's going to end up being the thing where, in 10, well, maybe not 10 years, but 20, 30 years down the road, when, people my age, maybe slightly older, finally pass on, who were full on MAGA, had all the Trump merch and Trump flags and all of it. If they still have it and it's buried away in a closet, there are going to be kids and grandkids and stuff, and great grandkids that are appalled to find that in their
Yeah.
loved one's closet or whatever, similar to finding a white hood now.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned something, and I hadn't heard about this, so I want to expand on it. You said that there was a hearing with Judge Chutkin on the 5th. We're talking about a couple days from now.
Uh, I believe so. Yeah, I think it's going to be a quick hearing. I don't know if Donald Trump has to be there, and I think that's the day they're trying to set out the schedule for how this time frame, like how they're going to handle the case going forward. She's going to start looking at, like, both sides have said how they want to do it. In part, Jack Smith came out and said, "Hey, you know what? Here's superseding indictments fixed with the Supreme Court decision in mind. We took out everything we think is offensive, and let's just get the ball rolling." And Donald Trump's side came out and said, "Well, we got so many things we got to talk about, so many filing deadlines. Um, let's not have the first one till spring, maybe early summer 2025, and we might even go into fall 2025 if necessary. And they want to push it way out. So she's looking at um, how she wants to proceed with this case. Now, does that mean it's going to go to trial before the election? Probably not. There probably
No.
will be a bunch of filing deadlines, some motions that she'll rule on, things like that, a bunch of pretrial stuff.
Well, it's
But
not. It's not gonna go into trial before the election, and we're just too close. And I don't think that matters at this point. But there's one thing that I saw on TikTok. Glenn Kirshner, who I like, who's a former prosecutor, he said that there was a he called it a money line in that indictment, and the money line is that Jack Smith said that he would show and explain why this wouldn't fall under the uh, immunity decision by the Supreme Court. So, what that tells us is there's going to be some more evidence that comes out that we haven't seen, that nobody's seen. And I got to think that Donald Trump and his people are a little concerned about more evidence coming out.
I think that was part of it. I know there was some speculation early by a lot of different legal people that I follow, including Hawk, saying, well, Judge Chutkin could hold a hearing where Jack Smith lays out all of his evidence
Right.
and she looks at it and rules on it. And it sounds like Jack Smith is still willing to do that. He hasn't called for it, but it sounds like from that money line, he's willing to put everything on the table and say, hey, here's all my evidence of why the Supreme Court ruling doesn't apply, and go from there.
But when he handed down the superseding indictment, I've heard it both ways, so I'm not sure how to take it. The first indictment was there. We got the immunity. Now he's whining about it and all that stuff. And so Jack comes out with the superseding indictment, basically indicting him for much of the same things. It's just worded and pointed in a way that would get them around. It was a workaround to the immunity decision. Does that mean that first indictment is pretty much negated and done, and now we're just focusing on a second one?
The way I understand it is basically he said, because it's the same case, it's the same trial. He just went back and said he got a different grand jury to look at the same evidence and come back with he should be on trial for these four charges, which are the exact same as the first time.
Right.
But because of how he worded it, he took out everything that might apply with the Supreme Court, with that immunity ruling. And I think this is the new one that applies. The other one is now gone.
Okay.
It's not like they're not dismissed. He modified his original indictment to match the Supreme Court ruling.
Right.
But the big thing is he got another grand jury, 23 or 25 other people to sit there, look at the same evidence and come back and go, yeah, he needs to be on trial.
Well, and the thing about it is when they got this thing with the immunity and Jack Smith said, I need 3 weeks to look at this. Everybody thought, why are you dragging your feet? Why are you slowing this down? Well, now we know. Now we know.
Exactly.
And this is why I've always said you got to trust Jack Smith. He's not going to go through this whole thing and end up with a goose egg. He's just not going to do that. He's a smart enough lawyer to play this out properly. Um, the the other thing I wanted to ask about what you thought is the September 18th um, sentencing for the Manhattan District case, the 34 felony charges, and I'm sure they're going to address the gag order violations too. Uh, there's a lot of people, and I don't know if they're just saying this because they're used to having the rug pulled out from them. Some people are saying, yeah, they'll probably put it off on the 18th again and push it past the election. I'm not so sure that's the case, but I don't have any reason to prove that.
Uh, I think there's going to be a sentence that day, just my gut feeling. Um, Now, Donald Trump is trying some stall tactics. He tried again to go to federal court with it, saying, well, the election's coming up. So this case really should be in federal court because I can't run for president from a jail cell in front of the same judge. He tried to get it to federal court before,
You're
and
right.
that judge said there's no federal question here. This is state crimes. This, you don't need to be here. This is all from stuff from before you were president,
Right.
that you entered into doing all of this, and you might have finished writing the checks and stuff while you were president, but that doesn't matter. I don't think it's going to go to federal court. No. And in the process, all Donald Trump has done has been pissed off Judge Merchan.
Right.
And if it's not Trump pissing off Judge Merchan, it's his surrogates like Jim Jordan.
Yeah. Going after his
So,
daughter, trying to get a
right,
subpoena out to her.
right. So, do I don't know if it's going to be a thing. What he could do is, yeah, I sentence you to, well, however much jail time. Sentence to begin November 6th, 2024.
Yeah.
And just leave him a free man until the election, but have the sentence hang over him the entire way. But no matter what he gets, Donald Trump could get a fine.
Right.
Or he'd be told to go pick up litter on the highway or whatever sentence they give him. Unless it's a dismissal of all charges and making him a not a convicted felon, Republicans are going to scream election interference no matter when they sentence him to prison, no matter what day he has to report, whether he's a free man, it doesn't matter. They're going to scream that this was election interference, except it's only in September because Donald Trump tried to push it out.
Right.
He got the delay.
Right. Yeah, he fucked himself again. I don't know if you heard about this interview he did on Fox News with Mark Levin that might hurt this. Was it the January 6th case, or I don't know
Yeah,
which case it was about, but he
it was January 6th.
he was moaning about that because Jack Smith had the superseding indictments. Now he's back on the hook and he's nervous. But he said, "Can you believe they indicted me for or convicted me for no indicted me for election interference?" And he fucks up by saying, "I was entitled to election interference,"
Yeah.
which essentially is a confession, which is a dumb
Yep.
thing to do before you even have the fucking trial.
Oh, yeah. He basically admitted to interfering with the election. And it's like we always say, let Donald Trump talk, he's going to fuck himself.
Yeah.
And he continues in that same interview. Then he says that children are going to school, getting gender reassignment surgeries, coming home 3 days later. And then he said, what was it? They come home 3 days later after getting the surgery. And then 15 years later, asking, who did this to me? What happened? I don't know what happened. Who did this to me?
Yeah. That's ridiculous.
What? None of that makes any logical sense. You're talking about schools that don't have the money to buy pencils and crayons,
But they got
but they somehow have the money
operating
to do.
rooms.
They have operating rooms and gender affirming care surgeries. No, and what parent would leave their child at school for 3 full days and not go check on them?
Right.
None of it makes any sense. He just says whatever he's going to say because he thinks it sounds radical and extreme, and people go, "Oh my God, that's a real thing."
Yeah,
At
Donald
least
Trump.
some people do.
Donald Trump is an emotional animal, so he only knows how to react that way. And what he's trying to do is trying to get that emotion out of the people. I'm going to scare them. Uh, Narcissists always exaggerate, as I've said before. The whole thing. Well, all of Joe Biden's 15 million jobs that he created all went to illegal immigrants, 100%. In fact, I think it's more than that, more than 100%, which is, of course, not possible. Now he's going to tell people that kids are getting surgery in school, being away from their parents for 3 days. And all of it is just ridiculous. It's totally inaccurate. But because he's such an emotional animal, he's trying to do whatever he can to instill that fear and that anger in the people that follow him. And the people that follow him may fall for that shit. But the more moderate folks, they're listening to that and going, "That's fucking crazy. I can't even get on board with that."
Yeah, he's playing to his base,
Yeah.
and barely his base at that.
Yeah.
He's just trying to alienate any group of people he can at this point, whether it's immigrants, whether it's LGBTQ members, or whatever it is. He's trying to ignite this idea of the other and oh well, you got to be better than this other group that's trying to destroy everything because it's all smoke and mirrors. It's all he has left, but it's the only thing he knows because it's worked for so long for him.
Right, right, right. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the sentencing. I know there are people are going to be upset if they delay it till after the election. I think at this point, um, the sentencing, it would be best to get it done. They've already delayed it one time. But if something happens where they don't do it till after the election, I'm really not bugged by that at all because he's done so much damage to himself. He can't win the election. And there's part of me that looks forward to the trials after the election or the sentencing after the election because that's when he becomes the most vulnerable. He doesn't have the protection of being a candidate. He doesn't have the protection of being a president. He will have lost a horrible election, and all the Republicans that stick up for him now are going to have enough and step aside from him. He's going to get crucified after this election. He's going to be absolutely decimated. And I don't have a problem waiting for that. It's 2 months.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's as important that he gets sentenced. The only way I would be pissed is if the judge came out. I don't see it happening, but if the judge came out and said, "Yeah, I agree. There's something with this immunity thing. We need to have a retrial and we need to start over, and we'll do it next year."
Yeah.
That's the only way I'd be pissed.
Yeah, I don't see that happening though. Judge
I
Marchand is not that kind of judge. He's pretty conservative and pretty serious and pretty to the law.
I don't see it happening either, but that's the only way I would be irritated by them not doing anything with the sentencing ahead. As much as I want to hear Donald Trump, you are hereby sentenced to begin uh, serving a 20-year consecutive sentence at Rikers Island, effective immediately. Bailiff, take him away.
Right.
As much as I want to hear that, I'm okay with waiting a few more months.
Yeah, no, I don't have a problem with that. And since we're on that situation, let's talk about Florida real quickly. We're coming to the end, but I want to talk about this. We of course have Aileen Cannon, the judge down in Florida with the classified documents case. She dismisses the case because she's a biased, stupid piece of shit. Um, and finally, Jack Smith does appeal it to the 11th Circuit. Now, in that appeal, he didn't ask for her removal because he knew that would add another fucking wart to this whole thing. He wants to get the appeal, and I don't think there's any way he doesn't get that appeal. That decision was so ridiculous.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think he does get the case reinstated. And the thing is, with as egregious as this decision is, along with all of her other decisions, which I'm sure the 11th Circuit is working on. Now, I could be wrong, but it's very possible that they could recuse her anyway
Yeah, that's what I'm
with
thinking.
this by itself.
When they
Is that
flip,
he didn't ask for it, but he's hoping that they will just do it.
right? Well, they overturned her before, and it was pretty horrible, pretty embarrassing for her. They will overturn this one, which is embarrassing for her. But we also had that bit of information that came out in between, where we find out the judges in the courts down there specifically asked her to recuse herself. And they asked her for the very reason they're having to deal with now. So it's reasonable to think these judges are going, it's fucking embarrassing. He didn't ask for it, but we got to get her out of there. Otherwise, we're going to be a laughing stock.
Yeah, and with that, that leads to something else because Donald Trump is going, if the case gets reinstated, Donald Trump will appeal to the Supreme Court
Yeah.
and try to say, well, she said he was unconstitutionally appointed, so blah 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 blah. You need to look at this and rule. Well, he's already saying he's thinking about bringing a challenge to Jack Smith in the DC case
Right.
for the same reasons and having Judge Chetkin rule on it. And try to do that up there.
Right.
Well, what could end up happening is if for whatever reason the 11th Circuit agrees with Judge Cannon, Jack Smith could go to the Supreme Court as well. But if you get two appellate courts that rule differently on whether or not he was constitutionally appointed, even in two separate cases, then the Supreme Court's almost guaranteed to take it and issue a ruling because you got a disagreement at the appellate level.
Right.
But if both appellate courts agree, they might just wash their hands of it and say, well, there's no issue for us to decide. Lower courts got it right. We're not touching this.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, if he appeals it to the Supreme Court, it's not going to get to them till after the election. And if the election goes the way we think, do we see a change in attitude with the Supreme Court, knowing that they got a lot on the line if we've got the House, the Senate, and the president? It's a much different situation with Donald Trump out of the way. We know the Supreme Court can back off of things if they think they're going to have to pay for it. And if Kamala wins in November 5th and we get the House and the Senate, they may be a little less motivated to save Donald Trump, who's already lost.
Yeah, you're right. You've been talking about this idea that they go and they try to pressure Alito and Thomas to resign.
Yeah.
Well, we were talking earlier about them saying, well, we're not going to wait on that to happen. We're going to expand the court. Well, they're already talking about expanding the court and adding in 4 new justices. Let's just assume. And then you have these rulings coming up, as Clarence Thomas and Alito are even worried that there's a chance that there could be investigations into them and criminality and stuff, that they may have to step down because of it. They're not going to push too hard to save Donald Trump if they're
No.
worried about maybe facing criminality on their own and drawing a spotlight to them that way maybe they're forced out. Because could you imagine a Supreme Court situation where we added 4 new justices and then Thomas and Alito both resign and
Yeah.
Kamala Harris gets to pick 6?
Right. That would be crazy. And that's conceivable. If the pressure's enough, they could just say, fuck it. Leave me alone. I'm walking. So we'll see what happens. We got a big week coming up. This debate's going to be interesting to see if it comes off. We're going to wrap things up for the Rational Boomer podcast. Eric, thanks for coming in. I appreciate it. Direct from Iowa, red state, Iowa. Do you think there's any chance Iowa flips to blue? I'm guessing no.
I think it's better than you think.
Really?
I think Iowa is in play. I'm not guaranteeing it's going to flip, but I think it's going to be closer than you think, between having just recently enacted the 6-week abortion ban after the Iowa Supreme Court said, hey, you know what? It can go into effect. That went into effect like 3 or 4 weeks ago. And then the was it Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals said that the transgender ban in schools can go into effect, where they can't talk about transgenderism. They can't refer to people, transgender students by their preferred names, things like that. All of that was allowed to go into effect. I think those 2 issues coming up this close to the election,
Yeah.
I think it puts at least Iowa in the potential to be in play.
Yeah. I think if nothing else, there are going to be some states that will be surprising to people. I mean, hard red states that will be going blue. Could be Florida, could be wherever. But I think that's coming. And I think that lends itself to what we talked about with a pretty decisive win for Kamala Harris.
Oh, yeah. I have been saying beyond the 7 swing states, I have said I think Iowa, Missouri, Arkansas, Texas, and Florida are all in play potentially. That they could, whether or not they flip, I think they're going to be closer than anybody's going to ever expect.
Right. And if any 3 of those flip, it's a big win for Kamala.
If Texas or Florida by itself flips,
right,
it's a huge win for Kamala.
Yeah.
If 3 of the other ones, if Iowa, Missouri, and Arkansas flip, which wouldn't be outside the realm of possibility, they went blue for Clinton and Gore, I believe.
Right.
That's entirely possible. We could be staring at them talking about her having a landslide victory, and it's going to do a long-term damage to the Republican Party.
Yeah. Oh, no question. No question. Well, Eric, thank you very much. For those of you listening, thank you for taking the time out of your day. I hope you have a great day, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow.